Hey guys, thought I'd do a breakdown of this video I made recently. Basically, it's just an animation from Mixamo, piped over into Houdini to do some rigid body simulations, and then on to Blender for some rendering. So let's get rid of this guy. Alright, so if we go over to Mixamo, if you search for Swing Dance, you actually get a few of these guys. They're fun. But I just downloaded it and then brought that over into Houdini. So I'm in a geo context here. I put down an agent and just pointed at the input at an FBX, and then went and browsing for the FBX file, and then you just have to set the current clip. So once you have that, then you get your dancing figure. Woo! Cool. Rock on. So then you have to unpack that so you can actually get at the geometry. Yeah, okay. So moving down the end of this graph then, what happens is I time shift this and I just have it set locked at frame 1. So if we look at this node, even as we play it, it doesn't go anywhere. So from there, I remesh it just to give it kind of that low poly look, scatter some points on it, set up the normals, and then I Voronoi fracture it, right? So good old classic stuff there. So after the fracture, you can see it's broken up into all these little components, or little blocks, right? So that's handy. And then just following down the rest of this line, just set up rest positions and then pack it for, was it rigid body packing? That way the rigid body solver can be happy with it. But pretty much you just say create packed geometry and turn off create name attribute. Okay, so that means at this point we've got our guy. He's all ready to be animated. And he goes down into this DOP-net, and we'll look at that here in a second. But by itself, if we were to push that into the DOP-net with the rigid body solver, all the pieces would just fall to the ground. And as exciting as that is, what I actually want to do was kind of take the individual blocks and then parent them to their position in the animation. So in order to do that, I needed their positions in the animation. So I used this extract centroid node, which gives you the center points for all those blocks. And then I used a point deform to actually deform those points to where they're at in the animation. So what that takes in is the points that you want to push around, the resting points for them. So that's our time shift where we're just at the beginning frame, and then the last one is where they need to be deformed to. So those are the 3 points for it. Cool. So that's our points. So in order to constrain our little blocks over there, I made a little quick point wrangle that takes in the blocks and then these deformed points in as a second input. And all it does really is it adds the other point to our blocks just as a point in there, and then we set up a primitive that is a polyline that connects our other point and the current one, and then we set up these constraint types on the attributes. So we've got the rest length, constraint type, and the constraint name. Okay, cool. So with all that set up, then we can come into the DOP-net. Cool. So it's nothing all that complicated, but basically we've got the RBD packed object that just brings in the first context geometry. So that brings in those blocks. And then I have that wired into a constraint network. And this one's using the second context geometry. So you can see that those constraints are wired into the second slot. I'm not 100% sure about the right way to do this, so if anybody knows a better way, let me know. Yeah, so anyway, so we've got the constraint network. Set that to that. And I've got the spring constraint relationship. And I set the strength up kind of high and, medium dampening here. And then you just have to set the data name to pen. or specifically whatever it is that you set it in that pointer angle. Cool. So then that just goes down in here into the rigid body solver, merge in a ground plane, add some gravity, and that's that. So you can see the little yellow dots here are the actual constraints. So that's where the blocks are trying to get to, or at least that's where the springs are pulling them to. Yeah, cool. So that's that. Then really the only other side of this thing is I had all of these little particles flying out of it just for a little bit more fun. So this is really basic. Basically just coming back to the agent after it's been unpacked. I'm adding a point velocity to them, which I always kind of like the way this looks. So if you turn on the point velocities, when it's dancing, it actually calculates how fast all the individual points are moving, which then gets fed into a pop net. And this is a really basic pop net. The only thing in here is a pop drag, other than just the default stuff, and then I guess the ground plane and some gravity. So those point velocities are important though, because here's what it looks like with point velocities. And if I turn off point velocities, you can see there's still all the particles are spawning from the model, but they don't really have any motion to them. They just kind of are spawning and they immediately start falling down. So if we turn that back on, you know, like when the guy swings his hand up, then we get some motion out of it. Yeah, so that's really all there is to that. And then to render it out, I just set my display flag over here to our blocks, and then I went up to export, Alembic, and then set the export frame range. Pick a frame and whatnot. So I exported the blocks as one thing, and then the particles as a separate thing. And then I went over into Blender over here, and I set up a really basic scene. So you can import Alembic and bring those things in, which is great. So you get that, and then I just set up some really basic materials on them. So one of the cool things about the geometry that comes in on Alembic, it keeps your material groups. So I've got an inside and an outside material. For the particles, I created a little icosphere, just a little tiny simple one, parented it to the particle Alembic file, and then did point instancing. So if you come over to the material properties and go to instancings and turn on verts, then you'll get like the actual icosphere copied over to everything. Yeah, so that's the setup. I made this really elaborate backdrop shape. Yep. Let's see, now let's look at it rendered. So for the lighting, I'm quite lazy, so I just brought in an HDR that is like this nice little studio setup. And that's that, really. Yep. Then I just turned on motion blur, because motion blur makes everything look better. And yeah, that's that. Cool. Rock on. Well, I guess that's that, and I'll talk to you guys later.